At 10:45 a.m. on October 25, 1854, during the Crimean War, a brief and ambiguously worded military order was delivered to the British Light Brigade, a cavalry unit of roughly 670 men positioned in a valley near the port of Balaclava. Within less than 20 minutes, this order would commit the brigade to an advance that placed them directly under concentrated artillery and infantry fire from three sides, not because the men were reckless or seeking glory, but because they believed they were fulfilling a lawful and urgent command. The situation had begun earlier that morning, when Russian forces launched a coordinated assault on several lightly defended Ottoman redoubts along the Causeway Heights, which overlooked the Allied supply route. These fortifications, manned primarily by Ottoman soldiers, fell quickly, leaving behind captured artillery pieces. From his vantage point atop the Sapune Heights, Lord Raglan, the British commander, could clearly see the Russian teams attempting to remove the guns. Alarmed by the prospect that these cannons would be lost, Raglan dictated an order instructing the cavalry to advance rapidly and prevent the enemy from carrying them away. From Raglan's elevated position, the instructions seemed clear and reasonable. The Causeway Heights and captured artillery were plainly visible, and immediate action appeared essential. However, the battlefield below looked very different. Captain Lewis Nolan, an experienced cavalry officer known for his strong views on how mounted troops should be deployed, carried the order down to Lieutenant General Lord Lucan, commander of the entire cavalry division. By the time Nolan reached the valley floor, smoke from earlier engagements, uneven terrain, and the physical distance between commanders had obscured the guns Raglan intended to be attacked. Lucan could see only one obvious group of Russian artillery positioned at the far end of a long, narrow valley. This battery was supported by infantry and additional guns positioned on the surrounding hills, effectively creating a corridor of concentrated fire. Lucan hesitated, questioning the order's intent. He was unsure which guns were meant as the target. Nolan, visibly frustrated, gestured toward the valley and insisted that the attack must proceed immediately. Whether out of impatience, miscommunication, or genuine conviction, Nolan's gestures inadvertently reinforced Lucan's interpretation that the guns at the valley's end were the intended objective. Bound by military hierarchy and the expectation of immediate obedience, Lucan relayed the order to Major General Lord Cardigan, commander of the Light Brigade. Cardigan did not seek clarification and, adhering strictly to doctrine, prepared to carry out the command exactly as received. At the time, cavalry training emphasized discipline, speed, and unquestioning obedience. Hesitancy or deviation from orders was considered unacceptable, even deadly. As the Light Brigade formed up in orderly lines and began their advance, the valley's deadly nature became horrifyingly apparent. Russian artillery from the front and flanks opened fire with round shot and shell, striking horses and riders alike. Horses fell under the bombardment, men were killed or unseated, yet the brigade maintained its steady advance. Stopping or turning under such concentrated fire would have created chaos, risking even higher casualties. The scene was surreal, a disciplined cavalry formation moving forward into what was effectively a trap, a corridor of fire designed to decimate any advancing force. When the brigade reached the Russian gun line at the far end of the valley, they briefly overran the batteries and engaged in close combat. But there was no infantry support to consolidate the breakthrough, no additional cavalry to press the advantage, and no larger strategic plan beyond the initial order. Surrounded and heavily outnumbered, the survivors were forced to withdraw, retreating through the same valley under sustained artillery and musket fire. By the time the remnants returned to their starting position, the toll was catastrophic. Of roughly 670 men, around 110 had been killed, more than 160 wounded, and a significant number captured. Hundreds of horses were lost, leaving the brigade incapacitated as an effective fighting force. The original objective, the prevention of Russian removal of the captured artillery, was never achieved. The guns on the causeway heights remained in Russian hands. Subsequent inquiries revealed a pattern of systemic failure rather than individual negligence. No officer technically disobeyed orders. Instead, the disaster resulted from vague wording, assumptions made under pressure, rigid command structures, and the physical and perceptual separation of commanders, each seeing a different version of the battlefield. Responsibility ricocheted up and down the chain of command. Raglan blamed Lucan. Lucan blamed Cardigan. Cardigan pointed to the order. And Nolan, the one officer who might have clarified the original intent, had been killed early in the charge. In the years that followed, the charge of the Light Brigade became immortalized as a symbol of courage, discipline, and stoic bravery. Poets, painters, and popular culture celebrated the action as an example of heroic endurance. Yet the men who rode it often emphasized a different truth. They advanced not out of personal valor or glory, but because they were ordered to, and because once the movement began, there was no safe way to stop. The charge endures not as a story of victory, but as a cautionary tale, a single unclear order, executed without shared understanding and magnified through hierarchical obedience, can override judgment, situational awareness, and even survival. In war, once an order is in motion, its consequences cannot be undone, only endured, painfully and inexorably. The charge of the Light Brigade reminds military leaders and historians alike that clarity, communication, and shared situational awareness are not just abstract principles. They can be matters of life and death. A unit's discipline and courage cannot substitute for clear intent. The tragic events in the valley near Balaclava serve as a stark example of how rigid hierarchy, miscommunication, and assumptions under pressure can transform even a well-trained, highly capable force into a casualty statistic, and how history can simultaneously glorify acts of obedience while hiding the human cost behind them.